So I started this video at the end of 2025, and I tried to finish it, and I could not. My blood pressure got really high. My father called an ambulance when I told him the number, and I described chest pain. I had to just sort of deal with that. It wasn't a great experience at the hospital. And then I didn't get back to it because Minneapolis went under siege, ICE. There was too much stress with just the helicopters and everything and the constant sirens. It's hard to think about, this subject matter. And I don't know how long I'm going to be living here, so I have to finish up as many videos as I can. I've stopped 3 break-ins to my building in the past week. But this is on the literary industry. It's difficult. So this is the most difficult video in terms of subject matter and how the question is, do we live in a literary caste system? And I have to choose my language very carefully and keep this as an open question, but I have feelings that it may be the case. So the caste system in India, it looks something like this. It's a pyramid structure. You're born into these castes. Marriage is arranged within it, and there is no social mobility. So, and the definition I'm working for with the literary caste system is a rigid social hierarchy where author success is determined by social standing and networking through identity affiliation. And everything I've learned has sort of reinforced that to some extent. And the more I learn, the more disheartening it is. And, the more I look at where I am, I'm in the untouchables. So to begin, the difference between a writer and an author is networking. And the network starts at getting an agent and moving up from there. So they are the first line of gatekeepers. And then they push on to editors, ghostwriters, and the actual publishing contract. And this is the big 5. So Penguin, Random House, HarperCollins, Macmillan, Hachette Group, Simon & Schuster, and that's all the percentages they have of the market of them. So they have 80% of the market, and that's their percentages of each one. And we only know about these numbers because Penguin tried to buy Simon & Schuster, and a lot of the details of the industry came out in court when it was stopped. So the thing is, when you say the extra 20%, that is the self-publishing that exists in there is orders of magnitude larger in scale. So there are about 500,000 books published every year through the big 5. Outside of that, it's in the millions. It's like 3 million self-published. And it looks like this. So the agents, if you get past this first line of gatekeepers, it goes up to editors, and then it gets cycled around. If you can't get through that, your only recourse is print on demand or a vanity hybrid publisher. And those are where the horror stories are. So the only support group I'm in is a self-publishing support group, and I've learned a lot about being in there. And I've seen people who know a lot less, and it's hard to watch because a lot of the things we end up doing are just telling people not to go to vanity and hybrid publishers because it is just, it's like being on a contract with a big 5 publisher. It's like being on a cruise ship. Being a self-published author is like you're on a raft and you're telling other people not to swim in the mouth of a shark, because what happens is, like, you do everything yourself and you have to pay for it. And the business model of the hybrid publishers isn't to sell books, it's to get authors to pay them. And not only that, what can happen is they shutter their shops. Like, suddenly there was one post on there about a guy who said the publisher just vanished. He doesn't have his manuscript. He doesn't have anything. They took his money and ran. And there's horror stories of authors who will go into a bookstore, they will find their book, and they're not getting any money for it. They signed off all the rights to their book. They have no rights to it. So then the other part of this is print on demand, which is the only viable solution for a lot of self-published authors. And it allows you to physically create the book, and you have to do everything yourself. You have to, in terms of choosing the paper, choosing, doing the artwork, the formatting, everything, the dimensions, and then you have to put in the BizAc codes, all the metadata codes. And so, but it isn't perfect, and there are concessions there in terms of the economics of the price, because the big five are able to print with completely different margins, and they have access to better printers, just straight up. They have better printers. And so I'm going to pivot to this. This was a Collier asked, but this is the one thing that sort of upset me. She hated print on demand, and she just called it absolute garbage. So I'm redoing this section. Obviously that video upset me, and her attitudes about print on demand upset me. And why print on demand exists is kind of important, because the industry is so big and the warehouses are so big. So first, why does Amazon exist? It's because when Bezos was an analyst, he saw a data point that struck him, and it was that bookstores contain 1% of all books. So he created a business that would just send books in the mail, and that would have direct access to the warehouses, and just books would go through the mail, very rare books that are very hard to find. And that was in the 90s, and there have been millions and millions of new books published each year since then. And print on demand fills this space of, when a traditional five publisher, they do print runs, and they can be massive, and they can be massively disappointing. So I think the book Spare by Prince Harry was just found all over the place. People abandoned it in like hotels and on buses. People were just finding it, and that's books people bought. That's true for a lot of books that people don't buy at all. They just stay in bookstores, and those all have to get destroyed or recycled. And the industry is unique in that it recycles about 40% of all the books, and it has to do this by necessity almost, because they destroy so much. And what makes print on demand is that the book doesn't exist until someone asks for it to exist. So not only are you saving the material, you're reducing the carbon footprint of a book sitting in a warehouse waiting for someone to want it. But that does create a problem with different print-on-demand companies with varying degrees of quality, and that the big five, they have access to better printers. And so I used Ingram Spark. They're the best, but they're not perfect, and they can't quite compete with a regular large publisher. And that is a lot of what she's complaining about in this video. What she was doing was she was buying books off eBay and thinking, not understanding who's fulfilling that order. And it's likely someone running a business where they have a whole list of PDFs ready to send to a print-on-demand company. The book doesn't exist until she orders it. And they print it, and it's printed on low-quality white paper, which is sort of invisible. It kind of can be see-through. The people placing the orders have never physically handled one of these books, and they don't really know what the quality is, and they don't really care. So in the self-publishing support group, we go back and forth with the quality of print-on-demand companies and which ones to trust and which ones to don't. But the fact that we're doing that is sort of symptomatic of this caste system, and that, her as a consumer complaining about it doesn't really understand, and it's not really her problem that all these people who didn't get past the threshold, past the gatekeepers of getting an agent, uh, have to settle for creating a lower quality product. So one of the videos that I made that I deleted was on how to physically make a book, and I based it off of like you're building a rocket ship, and I sent this to the self-publishing support group, and I sort of explained to them there are certain factors when you go over a certain word limit that changes the nature of your writing for your genre, and just trying to push people away from going to these vanity publishers. And it didn't really have an effect because not enough people watched it. But the other reason I deleted it is because of this, which is trajectory. In order for a book to have success, it needs a marketing launch, it needs a launch pad, and it needs to reach an audience. That's not into physically making the book. And it's a completely different component. And now that I've been in that group for a year, that is the only thing that they're trying to achieve, is trying to figure out a trajectory. They're just all asking each other every week, what exactly are you doing to reach people? And most people end up just posting about their own book. And like, this is the last place to be like marketing your own book, as much other writers who are trying to figure out how to market their book. But there are different strategies, but the problem is with, my book, my audience, I am in the untouchable zone of how hard that is to read and how difficult that story is. This isn't a story for many people in the sense of, unless you're a person who's, I said, it's for women with migraines and men in federal prison, or families, members with people with migraines. And at the very end, moral philosophy that is very complicated and even more niche. So in terms of my target audience, I have everything stacked against me. And when I wrote this, I disobeyed all the rules of what they tell you on know your audience. And the reality is, when you write a memoir, that doesn't make any sense. The whole purpose of it is the audience has to know who you are, who the writer is. So anyone could pick that up, or no one. So, and with memoirs, I created the analogy of, there's something called the Iron Triangle with the military-industrial complex between Congress, bureaucracy, and interest groups, in which there is just a self-supporting feedback loop of special interest and money and favors going back and forth. And the same thing exists in the literary industry, specifically with memoirs. And it's agents, celebrities, or persons of interest, and media. And the attraction is they have a built-in audience. Media is going to get more attention because they already have a name. If they have a new person of interest, it goes to agents, and it goes right back to publishers. And anyone outside of that is just sort of drowned out with the noise. And one of all the writing tip guides say, don't write a memoir. Your life isn't important enough. Your life just isn't interesting enough. It's hard to read those advice columns when you're working on one, and my memories are stranger than fiction. So I'm going to focus on one specific part of the Iron Triangle, and that is the New York Times and its role in reviews. And for an author, it means you have done everything right. It's like qualifying for the Olympics. You haven't gotten an award, but you're there. It means you have done everything right in terms of networking, to get all the way up the ladder, to get recognition. And the problem is, we all know sometimes it's not writing. It's 100% networking. Someone did the writing for them. And when I see those stories, you sort of live with it. That is until I saw this quote. And when I read this quote in this context, it floored me. Was in the review of Millie Bobby Brown's 19 Steps, a book that she didn't write, that is, it's about, so very briefly, it was a stampede disaster in World War II where 173 people died in a tube station from an air raid. And for context, 3% of the world population died in World War II. So there was a lot of backlash to this book, and it getting the recognition it did, and specifically that review, because it didn't accredit the actual writer, the woman who actually wrote it. And the thing is, the review changed. That quote disappeared. It disappeared, and it was rewritten in a completely different tone. I don't have a screenshot of the original because I never thought reviews could be something that could just be redone or something, and it's sort of just lost, and it's in my memory, and you have to trust me that it actually said that. And these are the other gatekeepers. To say anyone who says there are no gatekeepers doesn't understand the system, that culture is the operating system, and it is the gatekeepers on multiple levels. So when I watch all the other complaining about, it's people in the MLAs, graduates who are in the literary industry who are pushing out certain authors or not. You look at certain books that were written that could never be published today. I think Blood Meridian is a book that could never be published today. It could never get past for a first-time author. It's just, if you put all those words together and submitted them, no one would look at them and take it seriously, or it would just be too horrifying. And it was a book that didn't win any awards, but it is considered one of the most important books of the 20th century. So the other part of this video is book awards, and this is why it's taking so long. It's difficult to talk about. I submitted to 5 of them in the first year, 2024, when I published the Pulitzer Minnesota Book Awards, Eric Hoffer Book Awards, something called the Next Generation Indie, which is relatively new and sort of sus, the Independent Book Publishers Association. And it was very frantic because, like, you have to get a physical stack of books, and I have to submit them at a very specific deadline and send them in. And I remember doing the mailing process, just sort of sweating, panicking, sort of like with a headache, and getting the mail packages ready, and just being very frantic in doing it. And when I ended up going out with a friend and just explaining on the process of this, he sort of just gave me a reality check and said, I have no chance of winning. And he just said, only women read books, and you're a very strange dude. And so I had that in my head I wouldn't know the results for a year. And that sort of polluted my thoughts. And just, like, I had not really thought of the gender dynamic of all of this until he sort of so matter-of-factly put it that way. And now I know the results. So the gender dynamics were not really on my mind throughout writing or applying. And, I noticed it obviously when I tried to get a literary agent, and all of them were women for memoirs specifically. But I have the results from the awards. So for the Pulitzer, 3 out of 3 finalists were women. For Eric Hoffer, 8 out of the 10 finalists were women. Minnesota Book Awards, 3 out of 4 finalists were women. For the IPBA Disability, 3 out of 3 were women. And for the Indie Book Award under Memoir Personal Health Struggles, 6 out of 8 were women. And, a lot of the judges were women. And I spoke to someone at the IPBA, and it's only 2 women. I don't know the other ones, but also this is me. It's pretty hard to identify and empathize with someone that looks like that. I mean, like here, I like this photo about me because you would never guess what you're seeing as symptoms of a disability. I'm wearing sunglasses because the light bothers from photosensitivity. I'm wearing a bandana not to look tough, but because I have to protect my scalp from the sun, and if I get burned there, it's just, I'm cooked. Moving to the Minnesota Book Awards, I'm going to go through. Some of them involve struggles. This one's one of the finalists. This one sort of upset me just because it was a therapist. I lost to a few therapists, and that meant anyone who read my book knows at the end, like, I grew up in those chairs. This is a psychologist. I never got to be anything at the very end of my book. I describe losing my psychologist because I'm disabled, and because that's how insurance works, and it's not guaranteed that they'll cover it. This is the only man that he didn't win, but it's just ordinary moments. So when it comes to a man, sort of like the grief part is absent and the winner was this, and she won 2 books at the same year for the same Minnesota Book Awards, and this one sort of stunned me because it was the last one I submitted to and the first one I got a response for. And my response, the email they sent me was, well, it's like, you didn't make the finals, but please submit again next year for your next book. And I'm like, I've been disabled for 25 years. It took 15 years to write this book. I can only submit the book once. There's not going to be another submission. And, a year later, what happens is I get an email from them asking me to be a judge. And I was like, if they know anything about me, it's like, yeah, I can write and I can barely read. It changes my writing style in a lot of ways, because I mainly listen to audiobooks because of my eyes, and I can only write for so long without it hurting me. But they have no idea who I am, like, despite me giving them my book and it being gone through their judging process. They're coming back and asking me to be a judge, and it's like, you probably didn't get past the prologue because of how difficult it was. So with the other awards, it didn't get much better. For the IPBA, under disability, 2 of them, the finalists, were picture books. One is 28 pages, the other's like 30 something, and now this book does not describe what disability is being seen. It doesn't describe on the back, the cover, and the description. And it's like, I spent 15 years writing about an invisible disability, and I didn't even realize I was, competing against a picture book. So the Pulitzer was the biggest long shot, and transition. One is about a woman who lost her son. This was also reviewed in the New York Times. The one that won was a picture book, or it's like a graphic memoir where she drew all this, and it's yeah. As a writer, I don't know that I'm competing against this in terms of, and so when I ended up going back to, I spoke to someone at the IPA about this, and I'm like, give me more information on who graded this. So I did learn something, that I have autism I learned that from feedback from my writing, and all the people who judged me didn't know that. They didn't get that in the version of the book because it wasn't there. I didn't get the diagnosis yet. And I spent a year trying to do an update now, and I've updated it here and there, but I'm doing a larger one. And first year when I published in 2024, it felt like I had imposter syndrome, and then I sort of like I'm pretending to be a writer because there's no validation from any source at all. And the reality is just that doesn't apply if you're fundamentally not like anyone else. Imposter syndrome is when if you are fundamentally different, not everyone does this on their own, has a headache every day, and my voice just isn't transmissible, and my ability to build a network just isn't there. And this video was difficult just because of the gender angle, because that really threw me for a loop, and it applies to migraines. So I follow one influencer, and just has life with migraine, and she says, so whenever I make a post about migraine women, I get chewed out in my DMs by men saying, but what about us? And dear men, I see you. Yes, you have migraine too. Yes, you can suffer just as much as women. My account is directed towards women for decades. Migraine and women's health was as female hysteria, dramatic historically. When migraine has presented in men, it has been taken far more seriously than women presented with the same symptoms. If you want to learn more about this, you can read the book Migraine by Oliver Sacks. It documents the historical male to female bias in migraine care. And I know this, but also that book was initially written in 1980, and this copyright is 1992, is updated. So triptans are in some ways older, or this is older than triptans. But the other thing is my memories of growing up with the disease really sort of conflict with this. I was teased as a child for having a woman's disease. No one took it seriously because I wasn't an adult woman. I remember as a teenager being in the special migraine ward. I remember a woman who was 40s, 50s, and she just looked at me sort of bug-eyed, like I didn't know men had migraines. And I was just I just sort of looked at her like, what do you mean? But to say I haven't been invalidated or I've had neurologists question my pain tolerance. I've been treated as a drug seeker from some clinics, or just because I had an unusual protocol. So this is all very difficult, and I don't want to give this misrepresentation or something that I'm griping, but it is a weird, because when I wrote about my life, it's my memories of my disease, and this sort of gender dynamic wasn't really it doesn't quite conflate when you're isolated and you're alone and you have a headache every day. Your gender isn't really on your mind. And the reality is, when I do go out into the world, the people I connect with are more women because they're more likely to have migraines. And so this video took months to film and a year to sort of plan and process. It started as reading an article about describing the literary industry as elitist, and while still sort of going through the do's and don'ts of publishing. I'll show you one thing that shows up in my algorithm.
Number one, memoirs that read like journals. Here's the painful truth. Personal memoirs are one of the highest failure categories. Why? Well, because most are written as therapy, not as a story for the reader. According to BookScan, memoirs make up less than 5% of nonfiction sales, and only a handful ever break through. If every chapter is here's how I felt, here's what happened to me, here's why my life sucks, or even just here's how I overcame this thing, with no reader takeaway, the result is 50 copies sold, mostly to family. It's like inviting people to your therapy session and charging admission. They're gonna smile politely, but they're not coming back. Great memoirs aren't about the author, they're about the universal story underneath and the message for the reader, okay? So if you are gonna write a memoir, your memoir isn't about you, it's about what your story can do for the reader and how your story can help the reader and the themes for the reader.
So as hard as that is to process, just as the tone and how brutal it is, I wrote a universal story in some sense, that a story that had to be told because it's just an invisible disease that affects millions of people, and there is something else at the end of it that is a message for the reader. But the truth is, even my family hasn't read it because it's too painful for them. I have a lot more family members than books sold in years, and I can't even get family to leave reviews on Amazon, and this just infuriated me because it was like, I hate to beg people for that because I can't get a book on Apple Books without so many reviews. This has been a difficult process. I'm doing a rewrite on the ending, updating and adding sections, and it's difficult. The Lyme's disease symptoms are still there. I tore the labrum in my hip, and it's the cartilage.
So when I tried to finish this video before my computer crashed, I wasn't able to process the video, and I took it as a sign to redo the ending, add to it, and I put it off for a month, and now I have to have hip surgery soon, and I grew a cartoonishly long mustache, not being able to walk too much. So that guy's video stuck with me a bit, and how to sort of counterpoint, is the purpose of a memoir all that different from a novel in a lot of ways? That it is, you're putting yourself in someone else's shoes and place and time, and offering a perspective and giving a perspective to that reader. And the one thing I haven't discussed in all my videos is the most important thing about my writing, which is the ending, and it has nothing to do with migraines. It ends on a moral philosophy of describing where morality comes from in the material universe, and it is this sort of philosopher's stone question of the unanswered. And because I laid in bed for a decade with a headache, I figured out the answer, and then it was just like a light bulb, and then I spent years sort of crafting it, and then if it wasn't for that, I wouldn't have been able to spend 15 years writing about the rest of my life if I didn't have that ending. And it's close to 50 pages, and The difficult thing is my father asked me, well, who's your audience? And it's moral philosophers, programmers for AI, and machines themselves, because part of it is giving a new method of teaching morality to machine learning and AI. And there's not a big audience. And it's even more niche than sort of the disease memoir audience, and combining the two. And my writing style is I'm understanding more how unique it is the more distance I've put between when I wrote it, and I want something that was very unique and not like it had to be sort of experimental. And but each section seems like it's written like a different person. And in the years when I was a writer, I changed my style and usage of time. And one of the critiques I got was that it was very like a journal writing, and that really annoyed me, because it's like, this wasn't a journal. These were my memories, and they were so precise and exact, and I filled them with so much detail. It was hard. And at the end of all of this, hearing some of the judges' critiques was just, so having something that important as a component, as a final component, and losing to picture books, and losing one of the judges' critiques. I remember being in the hospital getting an IV and reading one of the forms, and he said pity for his condition, in not expecting that I'd actually end up reading that. I'd be the only one reading that. And it still just left a hole in me. So I got delayed again. I got sick. I don't know if it was pneumonia or bronchitis. And the audio at the end of that was compromised, even though I recorded 2 a.m. My building was too loud. Got picked up on the mic. And it's been so long that I now have the findings of another year of book awards, and all the Pulitzer memoirs went to women. I looked at the Eric Hoffer one. It's woman. Some of the other ones, women. I noticed another theme, that She Writes Press shows up a lot. It showed up a lot last year, and that's just something can't apply to. But when I spoke to my father up north about this whole video and just this question, do we live in a literary caste system? His response was yes. Just matter of fact, yeah. And there are always editors. I mean, he was an editor at a newspaper, and I talked to him about the thing and discovered he did a lot more ghostwriting than I ever realized, for op-ed pieces. And this is a hard reality check. I want to keep writing, but at this time I'm more diminished now than in years past. The Lyme disease symptoms are chronic. I still can't drive. I don't feel safe enough to drive at the moment. And I've written a lot of other stories, and will I ever be able to get them out? I don't know. And if I did, to what? A lot of them are screenplays. That's even harder. They're just drafts for screenplays. But I have all outlines for other books I want to work on.
And the first one was going to be just taking the ending of this book and turning it into a different one. Just the moral philosophy as it is. And at the moment I'm just doing an update to just have as much of it in there as now, because I don't think I'm well enough to physically create another book in terms of the dimensions and getting the cover and getting the ISBN and doing all of that all over again. I don't see how I can physically do it or connect or network with anyone to create a cover in any sort of reasonable time frame. And that, I imagine, once I have a final thing, I'm probably just, it's already online on my website, just the ending of my book. To whoever, I think my website only gets hit by like Pakistan things trying to probe it. But once I get that done, I will either figure out how to network better or write, or I don't know which, but it's going to be hard. I have my surgery on my hip soon, and it's going to be a year recovery, and as I'm told, so I have no idea if I'm in a position to do this anymore in terms of making videos. This was sort of, and I don't know my hardware can handle it. It's struggling to do video editing as it is, and it's overheating, but I will press on for as long as I can.